Okay, so moving on. What we just did was create a new UI window. Set that to the var set up on our app delegate here. We gave it a root view controller and we made it visible. We made it the key window and we made it visible. And this is sort of the bare minimum that an iOS application needs in terms of user interface. In fact, we know that the application will crash if we don't provide a root view controller. So every application has to have a UI window. Every UI window that is the application's key window and visible window must have a root view controller. We provided a blank, not very customized, not very tweaked UI view controller as the root view controller. We created an instance of the UI view controller class and just changed its background color to magenta color. Not very much going on there. But there actually isn't much more that we can do with the current setup. That is because UI view controller is an abstract class. What is an abstract class? Anybody? So an abstract class is basically a class that you really must subclass in order to customize or have it provide really any functionality above and beyond like bare minimum, like changing the color. An abstract class, in contrast to a concrete class that we can instantiate and obtain a plethora of behavior from right out of the box. So being an abstract class, and also for those of you that aren't familiar with the term instance, when we say we have an instance of UI view controller, or we created an instance of UI view controller, we're basically saying we made a new UI view controller. So when we create an instance of UI view controller, we're creating a copy or a version of a UI view controller that becomes its discrete entity, like an individual like me or you. We are instances of people, but we are highly customized, right? So we want to create an instance of UI view controller and customize it. Except in this case, in order to customize an instance of UI view controller, we really must subclass it and create an instance of our subclass. Okay, so we are going to do that right now. We're going to create a subclass of UI view controller. And here's how we do that. We're going to create a new file first. You could go to File, New, File. Or what I prefer to do is Control-click on the file that is above where I want to insert my new file. I like to keep my Project Navigator list over here kind of organized. And I'm going to Control-click on App Delegate and do New File. This window is going to pop up. This looks a lot like the catalog of templates, application templates available where we picked iOS application, single view application. But this pertains to files, not projects or applications. And again, they're bucketed into different platforms, iOS, watchOS, OS X. We're choosing iOS, and we're choosing source code. We're working in iOS, and we're writing some source code right now. There are a bunch of templates in here. We could use Swift file, but that's literally just a blank file. And since we're subclassing a Cocoa Touch class, UI view controller, I'm going to choose the Cocoa Touch class template. So iOS source Cocoa Touch class, and then hit Next. It's going to ask us to provide some basic information. When this shows up, it might look like this for you. We're, of course, going to choose Swift. We'll leave that selected. We're making a subclass of UI view controller, so it's necessary to enter that information here. We then need to name our subclass something unique. So we're going to call this to-do list view controller, because what we are building is this piece of user interface right here, which is the user interface that encapsulates our list itself, our scrolling list of items. So we're going to call our subclass of UI view controller to-do list view controller. Finally, make sure to check this box. Also create XIB file. We will learn about and interact with XIB files a little bit later, but just know that when we check this box, two files are actually going to be created. There's going to be a Swift file that we write code in, and there's going to be an XIB file, which is sort of a way for us to graphically build a piece of user interface and link that user interface, that XIB file, to our code file so that we can control the user interface elements with code. But we'll get more on that later. For now, it's enough to enter a class name, the subclass, check that box, and make sure you've got iPhone and Swift. Hit Next. It will ask you where you want to save it. you can just choose the default location, which will save it hopefully adjacent to the appdelegate.swift file that we already have. And when you do that, you'll see it show up here under appdelegate, which is great. That's exactly where we want it to show up. You'll see we have one body of code, which is the contents of our to-do list view controller class. And we're going to have an XIB file, which, as I said, is sort of a graphical mechanism for building elements of user interface. And we're going to come back to this in a little bit. Right now, it's sufficient to say that we've got a Swift file and an XIB file. Both of those two pieces together make up our new class. So I'm going to hop back over to appdelegate, and I'm going to, instead of instantiating, creating an instance of UI view controller, I want to create an instance of my to-do list view controller. And I might do that just like so. I'm going to change the class name. So instead of creating an instance of the abstract class UI view controller, we're creating an instance of our concrete subclass to-do list view controller. Now, if we run our application, we should see almost exactly the same thing that we saw before. This is great. This confirms that the change that we made didn't break anything, which is always a good thing to confirm. I'm going to stop, and I want to do one thing to not only confirm that we didn't break anything, but to confirm that what's actually being presented on screen is an instance of to-do list view controller. So I am going to cut that line of code out of there. And I'm going to actually move that line of code in here and modify it slightly. I'm going to change the word view controller to the word self. So let's talk about this for a little bit. Actually, let's run the application first and just bring this thought to completion. Why don't we change from magenta color, change it to another color, let's say green color. So what I want to do is just move our basic customization of our view controller instance, which was just changing the background color, from appdelegate into our subclass. And this is the start of us adding functionality to the subclass so that it can do something really interesting for us. And adding this code here really confirms for me that what's being added to the window, if the screen eventually turns green when we launch the application, what's being added to the window is indeed an instance of our to-do list view controller. So I can click Run, watch the application launch, and I see that the screen turns green. And that's perfect, because that means that we are successfully instantiating to-do list view controller and adding it as the root view controller. And that's a powerful thing, because it means that we can slowly build this from a green screen into what you see here, this encapsulated piece of user interface that provides a list view with the add and edit buttons.